Gentlemen, this is a story of deceit and infidelity. All those who cheat should remember that their dishonesty will eventually come to light, and they will face consequences. I got married when I was 23, and she was 21. We met in college during my junior year, and our connection quickly grew. It was clear from the start that we were meant to be together, so we decided to get married. After she graduated, I found a job near my hometown where I grew up. My parents ran a farm there, employing 8 full-time workers and 45 seasonal laborers. Both my brother and I were involved in the farm's operations while growing up. Let's call my brother Bill for reference. Bill, who is 3 years younger than me, opted not to pursue higher education and worked as a laborer on the farm for years, despite our father's attempts to give him managerial roles. He preferred being a farm laborer, doing his job diligently and receiving his wages. That's what he dedicated his life to until he tragically passed away from cancer earlier this year. The farm covers nearly 700 acres and includes 3 houses. My parents live in the main house, tucked away from the main road, which also serves as the farm office. My brother lived in a charming carriage house at the junction of the driveway and the main road. Meanwhile, my wife, children, and I live in a farmhouse about 3/4 of a mile from my parents and brother. To expand the farm and protect the farmhouse, my parents acquired the neighboring property through the Family Farm Corporation. As a result, all 3 homes are now owned by the corporation, and my brother and I lived there rent-free, which was quite advantageous. While my parents hold officer positions in the company, they structured it so that my brother and I would inherit the farm when they pass away. According to the arrangement, Bill is entitled to 45%, while I receive 55% of the inheritance. Due to my active role in managing the farm alongside my regular job, I was given controlling interest. Even though I didn't receive extra pay for this work, my family and I enjoyed the perk of living on the property without paying rent, with the understanding that I would eventually become the majority owner. This arrangement created a wonderful family atmosphere, and we all cherished our time living there. In terms of my children, my oldest is a 21-year-old girl, followed by a 20-year-old boy. We also have a 17-year-old boy, and our youngest is a 15-year-old girl. Life was truly wonderful for all of us. My marriage with Connie was filled with happiness and love. Our children were remarkable, my job was thriving, and the family farm was flourishing. With this background in mind, you can truly grasp the overall picture. Now let me delve into the matter that prompted me to share this post. Approximately 3 years ago, my brother received the devastating news of being diagnosed with cancer. Unfortunately, he had always struggled with prioritizing his own well-being and only sought medical intervention when his symptoms became unbearable. Regrettably, by the time his cancer was detected, it had already spread to various parts of his body. Enduring a tough journey, he underwent grueling chemotherapy and radiation treatments that significantly impacted his overall health. Despite the toll it took on him, he bravely continued with his work commitments. Earlier this year, we experienced the profound loss of Bill, and it was an incredibly emotional period for our entire family, particularly for me. Bill held me in high regard as his role model, and I was there to help him through the challenges he faced in life. One major obstacle he tackled with my support was his battle against alcoholism, which he successfully overcame 4 years before his passing. Additionally, he grappled with significant tax issues that needed attention and resolution. I played a crucial part in helping him navigate these challenges, since he often struggled with even the simplest tasks life threw at him. As a result, our bond grew exceptionally strong, and we became very close. My wife and children also had a deep affection for him. Even though they affectionately called him Crazy Uncle Bill, it's important to note that Bill wasn't unintelligent or lazy. Instead, he lacked the motivation and ambition to improve his life and circumstances. Over the years, Bill had several relationships with different girlfriends, but none of them lasted. Many of these connections formed with women he met at bars, often resulting in short-lived romances. However, there was one instance when he dated a genuinely kind-hearted woman, and I had genuine hopes for their future together. Unfortunately, his drinking habits eventually led her to leave him. My parents wholeheartedly accepted Bill, loving him unconditionally just as they loved me. As per his will, Bill appointed me as the executor of his estate, giving me the responsibility of managing the distribution of his assets. His estate included various possessions, like a life insurance policy, a modest checking account, and personal items such as his motorcycle and truck. After his funeral about 2 weeks later, I found myself at his home, handling financial matters and going through the extensive paperwork he had on his kitchen table. While organizing the paperwork, I came across a statement from a bank located outside our town. To my surprise, the account held an impressive balance of over $70,000. However, what truly startled me were the names listed on the statement. The account was in Bill's name, but my youngest son, whom I'll call Joe, was named as the beneficiary with the acronym POD, which stands for Payable on Death. As I went through the details, I felt confused. I couldn't help but wonder why my brother had chosen to set up the account this way. What was the reason behind designating Joe as the sole beneficiary when he didn't have a closer bond with Joe compared to my other children? In fact, if anything, Bill had a stronger connection with my other kids rather than Joe. My mind raced, trying to find answers, but I realized I couldn't come up with a logical explanation. After making this astonishing discovery, my initial thought was to inform my wife and parents, but I decided to hold off on sharing the news for now. The next day, I went to the bank, taking advantage of my role as the executor to gather more information. I learned that Bill had opened the money market account just a month after Joe was born and consistently made contributions to it every 2 weeks. As I pieced together these facts, I couldn't help but focus on the undeniable connection between Bill and Joe, which troubled and concerned me deeply. Thoughts about the possibility of an affair between Bill and Connie, and whether Joe might be Bill's son, consumed my mind relentlessly. These thoughts left me in a state of anxiety and obsession. That night, consumed by these thoughts, I returned to Bill's house. I was determined to find any clues that could provide answers. Hours passed as I meticulously searched through every file and document in the house. Finally, I came across something that would change my life forever. Flipping it over, my world shattered as I found 2 old photos of my wife. In one, she was topless, and in the other, she stood holding a beer, completely naked. Shockingly, both pictures were taken in Bill's bedroom. Overwhelmed by a mix of devastation, anger, and confusion, I remained at Bill's house for several more hours that night, shifting between tearful despair and seething anger. Connie eventually called, asking about my whereabouts, which prompted me to return home. At that point, I decided not to directly address her, as I needed time to think about my next steps. I even briefly considered ignoring what I had found, but that idea was quickly dismissed. How could I even think of such a thing? Those photos were from years ago, and my brother was no longer alive. I couldn't keep this to myself. So, I made the choice to tell my parents about what I had discovered, and I followed through on that decision. The following day, I took some time off in the afternoon and met with them at the farm office. I informed them about the bank account and showed them the pictures of my wife. It was crucial to lay out all the evidence. My parents were completely bewildered when they saw the proof, and they couldn't believe their eyes. They were deeply disturbed and shocked by the revelation, seemingly even more than I was. They asked about my plans. I told them I intended to confront Connie and, if the allegations were true, begin divorce proceedings. While they understood my choice, my mother advised me to give Connie a chance to explain herself and to carefully think through my actions before proceeding. After our dinner, I went with Connie to Bill's house, saying I needed her help with cleaning and organizing. Once inside, I guided her to a seat and gently told her we needed to discuss something important. I handed her a packet containing the bank statement and pictures of her. I gave her the bank statement first. She looked at it and was surprised by the significant amount of money Bill had saved. I asked her if she noticed anything unusual on the statement, but she didn't, only mentioning the impressive sum. I then asked her to read the statement aloud from the top. She read the bank's name and address, followed by Bill's name. As she continued, her voice trailed off as she read the words, payable on death to Joe, our last name. She looked at me with a shocked expression, realizing she had been caught. She wondered aloud why Bill did this. I asked if there was something she needed to confess. She initially shook her head vigorously, but I pressed her, asking again if she was absolutely sure. Reluctantly, she confirmed her previous statement. With a sigh, I took out the photographs and placed them in her trembling hands. Her body froze instantly, and tears started streaming down her face uncontrollably. She pleaded to explain herself, her voice choked with emotion. I told her to tell me her side of the story. She was so nervous that she rushed to the bathroom, where I heard her vomiting. 15 minutes later, she came out and confessed to her involvement with Bill 18 years ago. She admitted that having the affair was a foolish and selfish choice, emphasizing that it lasted only a few weeks. Connie claimed she realized the mistake quickly and ended it. She assured me that since then she had kept her distance from Bill and only interacted with him when other family members were present. I asked if Joe was Bill's biological son. She confidently said, "No, he is undoubtedly yours." I asked how she could be so sure. She insisted Joe was mine, even if not biologically, because I had raised him. Her statements seemed contradictory, leaving me a bit confused. I then made it clear that our conversation was about her relationship with Bill, not my relationship with Joe. Despite her tearful pleas for forgiveness, I remained firm, offering no empathy or comfort. Instead, I got up from my seat and decided to leave. I told her not to return home until she had composed herself and looked presentable. I didn't want our children to see her in such distress, so I went home while she arrived about an hour later. Despite her persistent requests for a conversation, I firmly told her there would be an appropriate time for that in the future. We shared the same bed that night. However, when she tried to cuddle with me, I rejected her advances. Instead, I turned away and made it clear that I didn't want to share the bed with her. In fact, I wouldn't have slept in the same room as her. She silently cried throughout the night, struggling to sleep. The next day, I used my paid time off and went to the main house to meet with my parents. I told them about Connie's confession, and once again, they were shocked by the revelation. I confirmed that I intended to seek a divorce from Connie. When my mother asked if divorce was really what I wanted, I reluctantly admitted that it wasn't my preference. But after what I had learned, I couldn't trust her anymore and had no desire for any physical intimacy with her. After the meeting with my parents, I returned home and confronted Connie. I told her I wanted a divorce. Connie broke down completely, overwhelmed with emotions. She begged and said the affair had happened a long time ago. She insisted she was sure that Joe was my son. She pleaded with me, emphasizing her certainty. Once again, I firmly stated that Joe was not the main issue in our discussion. My love for him remained unchanged, regardless of his biological father. I made it clear that this betrayal was solely between her and me. The timing didn't matter. Whether it had happened 18 years ago or even centuries ago, the severity of her betrayal remained the same. Later that day, I set up a meeting with our usual farm-related attorney. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, he suggested a divorce attorney who happened to be a close acquaintance. Without wasting time, I scheduled an appointment with the divorce attorney for that same afternoon, initiating the legal process. The attorney reassured me that the farm and the 3 houses, all integral parts of the corporation, wouldn't be at risk during the settlement, providing some comfort amid the chaos. Despite the infidelity, the attorney explained that our remaining assets would still be split evenly. This was possible because my parents had wisely organized the farm as a corporation, anticipating such unfortunate circumstances. They had appointed themselves as the sole officers, a foresight that proved invaluable in minimizing potential fallout from a situation like this. If any of my children were to go through a divorce while having ownership in the farm, their ex-spouse wouldn't have any claim to the farm. The attorney clarified that the farm's corporate structure doesn't grant ownership rights to my wife. He also clarified that due to my wife's lack of employment outside the home, I might be required to provide spousal support for at least 5 years, possibly longer. Even in cases of infidelity, spousal support remains mandatory, which is quite surprising. The laws seem to favor women heavily, as he pointed out. While we could consider challenging this in court, his assessment was based on his past representation of clients in similar situations. According to him, that was the expected outcome. I had anticipated and prepared for it. Money wasn't my primary concern. I simply wanted to end the marriage. After returning home, I broke the news to Connie and she completely lost control. She cried and begged for a second chance, but I repeatedly refused. Then I let her know that I would be talking to the children over the weekend. I mentioned that I'd speak with Joe one-on-one first and then gather all the kids together, including Joe, to inform them. Connie asked if she could be present during these discussions, and I firmly declined. However, I did tell her that she could meet with them afterward if she wanted. On Saturday morning, I approached Joe and let him know there was something important we needed to talk about. We walked to the creek on our farm, where there was a pavilion and picnic benches. In that peaceful setting, I shared the news with him. As expected, he was devastated and filled with worry. In his distress, he asked me if I would still love him if he wasn't my biological son. I reassured him, letting him know that my love for him would remain strong, no matter his biological ties. I firmly told him not to dwell on it, emphasizing that it wouldn't change my relationship with him or with any of his siblings. I made it clear that this was an issue between his mother and me, and he and his siblings were not at fault. I went on to explain that I would be divorcing his mother, emphasizing that it was solely because of her affair with Uncle Bill and had nothing to do with him or his actions. We spent a couple of hours sitting and talking. I let him know that the next step would be to gather his siblings and have a conversation with them. Sensing his need for some time to prepare, he requested it, and I agreed without hesitation. I assured him he could take all the time he needed to feel comfortable with the situation. Back at the house, we kept up appearances of normalcy. Though my wife's behavior had noticeably changed, the children didn't seem to notice as we spent most of the afternoon relaxing by the pool. We played games like cornhole and tossed the frisbee, creating the illusion of a typical summer weekend for our family. However, beneath the surface, a dark secret hung over us, waiting to be revealed. After dinner, Joe approached me and expressed his readiness to talk to his siblings. Unfortunately, they all had plans with their friends that evening, so we decided to postpone the discussion until the following morning. The next day, we all woke up early, had breakfast together, and attended Sunday services as a united family. As was our usual routine, when we returned home from church, I gathered the kids and let them know I needed to talk to them privately. On the back patio, my daughter asked if Mom would be there, and I told her that she wouldn't be with us at that moment, but would meet with them later. This immediately made the kids uneasy. With a heavy heart, I shared the news with them, and it was tough to witness their reactions. As expected, they first seemed disbelieving, then became angry, and eventually sadness settled in. I then explained my intention to divorce their mother, and tears welled up in their eyes. We had a lengthy conversation, going into detail about the situation, and eventually, they came to understand and accept my decision. My daughter, overwhelmed by emotions, expressed her strong dislike for her mother and her desire to cut ties with her. I reminded each of them that they're young adults and have the freedom to handle the situation in their own way. However, I advised them to consider their mother's perspective and not rush into decisions based solely on this one incident. Instead, I encouraged them to think carefully and remember all the positive moments they've had with her, because she's still their loving mother. After they learned about the situation, they all acknowledged that their relationship with their mother had been good, but they were understandably upset, and none of them immediately wanted to meet with her. To seek clarity, I proposed doing DNA tests for each of them. I made it clear that their mother had admitted to a brief involvement with Uncle Bill, but I intended to have the tests for my own peace of mind and to uncover the truth and address any doubts. I assured them that no matter the outcome of the DNA tests, whether they were biologically mine or not, my love for them would remain unchanged because they were legally my children. Later that evening, their mother joined them in the dining room for a highly emotional conversation. Although I wasn't in the room, I overheard fragments of their discussion. Ultimately, the children expressed their love for their mother. However, their perception of her had been forever altered, and it seemed unlikely that they would ever fully forgive her for what she had done to me and our family. This news was devastating for my wife, even though it was the consequence she deserved. After that night, she slept in the guest room until our divorce was finalized, a process that took almost 8 long months. Throughout this time, she pleaded with me daily to reconsider and attend marriage counseling, but I remained firm in my decision. 3 months after our divorce, we received an unexpected offer from a developer interested in buying the house where my family and I lived, as well as the adjacent 80 acres of land. The monetary value offered was substantial, leading my parents and me to make a practical business decision and accept the offer. Consequently, my wife, our 2 youngest children, and I relocated 60 days later. It was during this time that my wife found a 3-bedroom apartment in town to move into. The harsh reality hit her deeply during this period, causing her to fall into a severe depression that required multiple medications for treatment. As a result, I temporarily moved back into my parents' home. During this time, I decided to pursue my long-held dream of constructing my own home on the farmland. The opportunity arose, allowing me to bring my vision to life. Collaborating with an architect, we designed a beautiful mid-size log cabin with 3 bedrooms. After its completion, I now live in this dream house with my 2 youngest children. They also spend a few nights each week with their mother. While my ex-wife continues to grapple with her depression, there are some signs of improvement. She expresses a desire to reconcile, but I have no interest in rekindling our relationship. Nevertheless, I treat her with respect and empathy. It's interesting how discovering the affair completely extinguished any feelings I had for her, leaving me with a sense of obligation rather than affection. Our conversations now mainly revolve around our children, as I try to minimize unnecessary interaction. Despite the betrayal, she doesn't have anyone else here besides our family, so completely cutting her off is not an option. I still feel a sense of responsibility toward her. Fortunately, the DNA test results confirmed that all of my children are biologically mine. The relief is immense, considering the turmoil and sleepless nights it caused. However, this revelation does not alter my feelings toward Connie. The profound betrayal she inflicted upon me remains unforgivable, and I will never be able to forget or fully forgive her. I still don't understand why Bill set up that account with Joe as the beneficiary. My ex-wife insists that they never discussed paternity, and I'm inclined to believe her on this matter. However, it's strange that Bill would make such a decision without any clear reason. Maybe he assumed something, or perhaps he wanted Joe to be his child. Despite this ongoing uncertainty, I'm content with my current situation and the relationship I have with my children. Restoring trust with my ex-wife may never happen, but I still care about her and genuinely want her to find happiness in life. I'm not exactly sure why I felt the need to share this, but expressing it in words has given me a sense of relief, and it has made me appreciate even more how things have unfolded.
At the age of 51, I hold the position of assistant manager at a large warehouse complex, while my 54-year-old wife works as a real estate agent in Tampa, Florida. She takes care of her 2 college-age children, and I don't have any children of my own. A decade ago, fate brought my wife and me together at a business convention, and we've been together ever since. We share interests in traveling, going to the beach, and spending time with family. Giving back to our local community, volunteering at soup kitchens, and organizing food drives for those in need are significant to us. Making a positive impact on others' lives and contributing to society has been incredibly rewarding. My wife is socially active, frequently attending events and spending time with her girlfriends. Our bed life has been satisfying, but I occasionally felt uncomfortable with her tendency to excessively flirt with men in positions of authority. I distinctly remember an incident at a real estate event when she engaged in what I perceived as excessive flirting with a real estate developer. I voiced my concerns right after lunch. She explained that most of her interactions were work-related, and although she eventually apologized, I still had doubts about her sincerity. Over time, her outings with friends became more frequent, resulting in extended absences from home. lasting only a few days each time but occurring more often. Her group included my wife and 3 other women with varying marital statuses. As she told me, "I've always been someone who trusts completely until proven otherwise, and this extended to my trust in my wife." One evening after work, my wife called and mentioned bringing dinner home while unknowingly having me on speakerphone. Background noise indicated the presence of 2 other women in the car with her. During the conversation, one of the women asked if I was joining them for a trip to Miami. This took me by surprise, and I asked my wife who she was talking to. She explained the woman was addressing me. Despite my confusion, I replied, "No, I'll likely be occupied with work." Later, when my wife returned home, we had a heated argument about her uncommunicated plans to travel to Miami. She claimed it was a last-minute decision and that she was going to inform me, but her friend revealed it prematurely. My wife informed me that they visited a bar, and one of her friends had too much to drink. Her work as a real estate agent involved interactions with various people, exploring different neighborhoods, active participation in community activities, and offering help to others. However, as previously mentioned, she had a penchant for flirting. Her job as a real estate agent earned her an annual income of over $120,000, while my own earnings were approximately $40,000, significantly less than hers. It's important to note that it took her several years to reach her current income level. She invested heavily in preparing for her trip to Miami, spending a substantial sum on clothing, despite already having an extensive wardrobe. A few days later, she left for Miami, which was only a 4.5-hour drive from Tampa, planning to stay for 4 days. However, on the second day of her absence, when I returned home from work around 7 p.m., something unexpected occurred. There was a distinct knock on the door, and a man in a formal suit stood there, holding a large manila envelope. He addressed me by name, handed me the envelope, and said, "This is for you." Afterward, he left. Upon opening the envelope, I found a note with a contact phone number and the words, "Contact me if you would like to discuss the photos." As I gazed at the first photo, it showed my wife seated on a man's lap, engaged in a passionate kiss with his hands on her back. They appeared to be in some sort of nightclub. The second photo depicted a scene by a pool where my wife and a man were sharing a passionate kiss. At this point, I decided to call the phone number provided on the note. During our conversation, I learned that the man was a private investigator who had been hired by another husband suspicious of his wife's infidelity. His job involved gathering information about the social circle of the client's wife. Upon closer examination of the pictures, I came across 3 more photos that clearly showed bed moments between my wife and the same man. In that moment, a mix of anger, frustration, and heartache overwhelmed me, causing tears to well up. I called my dad and recounted the recent events to him. He advised me to regain my composure and strongly recommended that I refrain from revealing anything to her. I assured my father that I would remain calm and not utter a word. With just 1 day left before my wife's return from her trip, I consulted with an attorney online. During our discussion, I openly shared the situation and explained that I had evidence of my wife's infidelity. Unfortunately, I was told that in Florida, it doesn't matter because it's a no-fault state. The attorney then asked how long we had been married, to which I replied that it had been over a decade. My plan was to hire a lawyer the next day while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy at home. However, when my wife returned from her trip, it unintentionally disrupted my well-thought-out plan as she had 2 days off. So, I had to delay my plan for a while. On the 3rd day, she returned to work, and I left the house after her. While she was away, I reached out to my father and Kenny for financial assistance to cover my attorney fees, and they agreed to help. I hired a lawyer and instructed them to start divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences as the reason. Afterward, I packed my belongings, and with my father's assistance, I moved most of my stuff to his apartment using his truck. However, I hadn't yet moved in with him. I intended to stay until my wife was officially served with the divorce papers. 2 weeks passed, and surprisingly, she hadn't been informed. Another week went by, and she was finally served with the divorce papers while at work. Following this, my phone began receiving messages from her, including questions like, "What's going on?" I was at home that day when my ex-spouse from SUNY B called me. I asked my father to be present in our house since I didn't trust her, and he arrived just 5 minutes before her. As soon as she walked in, she immediately inquired why I had filed for divorce and what had prompted my decision. I pulled out the pictures from my bag and showed them to her, explaining that these were the reasons behind my divorce filing. She was shocked, covered her mouth, tears welled up, and she attempted to apologize. At that point, I no longer wanted to see her and told her that we would meet in court. As expected, she bombarded my phone with calls and texts, suggesting options like marriage counseling before the divorce hearing. She hired an attorney who did everything possible to contest the process. My attorney mounted a strong defense, resulting in a favorable outcome for me. I received $60,000 in equity from the subsequent house sale, as well as $900 per month in spousal support for 3 years. We divided the furniture, but I chose to give it to her. About a month later, I learned that my ex-wife had cheated on me before, though I was unaware of it. One of her close friends had considered telling me about the affair, but felt it wasn't her place. Later, she expressed regret for not disclosing it and apologized. I responded that if I had known about the affair, I might not have been married to her for a decade. 8 months have passed since my divorce, and during this time, my ex-wife has sent me text messages almost every week, inquiring about my well-being. However, I've decided not to respond. I've maintained my phone number, choosing not to change it because it's my prerogative. Even when she mentioned that her children were curious about me in one of her messages, it didn't prompt me to respond. The pain from this situation lingers, but I'm fortunate to have supportive friends who avoid discussing that tumultuous period. I'm on a healing journey and have recently started therapy sessions. Despite the heartache, I'm confident that I'll be okay in the end.